The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
If you are looking for accessing and assessing meaningful content and language development through the SIOP model, you are in the right place. If you weren't looking for that, I invite you to stay and hang out with us anyways. I'm a big fan of the SIOP model, and I hope you will be too. I am an ESL teacher with Rutherford County Schools. I work at Rocky Fork Middle School. It's such a great place to work. I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees in New York State. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but grew up in New York State. I have 2 degrees from my undergrad, one in Spanish Ed. That's how I got into the world of education. My life was changed by a really impactful Spanish teacher. You can never underestimate a good language teacher in your life. I also got a bachelor's in dance performance as well, so total physical response. Anybody know that? It just kind of went hand in hand right there. I then went on to get my master's in TESOL. It was originally chosen because it made the most sense with Spanish to continue studying language teaching, just on the opposite side of the coin from teaching English. And then that's where I discovered that that was actually my passion. I absolutely fell in love with it within the first couple of weeks of school, and since then I've been pretty much in that trajectory. EDD, TBD, I was just accepted to Lipscomb's Doctor of Education program for strategic change in learning organizations. I'm really excited about that. So this summer, my self-care was reading whatever I wanted, because for the next 2 years, I'm gonna have to read what other people tell me to read. And that's been a lot of fun. As I said, I work at Rocky Fork Middle School. I hope to move up through different administrative roles. I would love to become an academic coach someday, and eventually the SIOP Queen of the United States of America. That's the end goal. So today's presentation, just a little agenda so you know where we're going. We're going to go over our objectives for the day. We are going to build up some background with the SIOP model. How many of you have heard of the SIOP model before? Awesome. And then how many of you have not heard of it and were curious about it? Anybody? Awesome. Couple quiet hands. That's okay. We're going to do a brief overview of SIOP, and then we're going to also look at some materials that are available to you, some things I bet you didn't even realize were available to you, but are. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion and practice with one another. We're going to review, and then we'll have time for questions, and hopefully get you out a little bit early so you can beat the line for lunch. So, as we have discussed this morning, language objectives for our students are just as important as the content objectives. So when I am framing this to different educators in my building who are curious about learning more about SIOP, this is where we start. And working with content teachers, starting with something they're comfortable with, the content objective, is a lot easier than just kind of saying, we need to work on language too. You have to kind of ease in with some of the teachers. So our content objectives, or the what we're going to be learning, is that we're going to develop a deeper understanding of the SIOP model as an effective tool for lesson planning and teaching. And then we're going to create measurable language and content objectives that can be used together to assess students' development in each area. So a language objective isn't going to help you assess a student's development, just like a weak content objective won't help you assess whether or not they've actually met what you're trying to teach them. So then we move over to our language objectives, which is the how they're going to get there and how they're going to show you that they are learning. A lot of schools in my county use this as success criteria. Have you heard of success criteria before? It's basically I know I have learned this when I can blank. So when I'm working with teachers in my school, I can relate it to success criteria, and that gets teachers really comfortable with language objectives. So we're going to share and request information by both speaking and writing. We'll get to the writing part in a little bit. We're going to record observations and questions during a presentation using a graphic organizer. You don't have to make it. I put one in your folder. And we're going to use keywords to complete the content and language objective template. Again, that's provided for you as well. So we are going to start by building up our background with the SIOP model. I saw a lot of hands raised that they've heard of the SIOP model before, and I'm sure that must imply that there's varying levels and degrees of how comfortable we are with the SIOP model, what we already bring to the table. So I would like everybody to open their folders. Courtesy of Target, 50 cents per folder, just letting everybody know that. We are going to work on column A of what we call an anticipation guide. Who here has used anticipation guides before? Awesome. It's kind of similar to KWL. So what you're going to do basically with an anticipation chart is at the beginning of this session, we're just going to focus on column A. So you're going to read each statement in the center, and then you're going to move over to the left, and you're going to answer the question in whatever way it prompts you. You might circle something, you might fill something in. This is an excellent tool that I use a lot when I'm teaching. It's a great subtle assessment tool that gets students thinking about it, but it's private, right? There's no right or wrong. They can look over and see, oh, it's okay if I'm gonna change my answer, because that's the point. So I will give you a couple of minutes, probably 3-4 minutes, to look over this. We also have some essential vocabulary on the back for you to peruse when you are done. And then if those of you who like to plan ahead like me, if you would like to get out your graphic organizer, that is the white packet directly behind the pink sheet. All right, 3 minutes on the clock. This doesn't have to be silent work time. It is summer after all. Right, so bringing it to the first statement, very confident. I can define SIOP. Who can confidently define SIOP for all of us? Yes, ma'am.
What it stands for is what you mean? Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol.
Beautiful. Let's have a nice golf clap for that one. That was great. Takes a lot of courage to start off the group. Excellent. Let's jump down to the second statement. BICS develops much faster than CALP. Did any of you look at those two things and think, what on earth do BICS and CALP mean? Anybody? Does anybody have an answer to share for that one?
True.
True, yes. Excellent work. And we'll get to what those mean as well. I'm going to, for the sake of time, jump down to the last one. Understand how to use both content and language objectives for assessment purposes. Can you please, in front of your sternum, I guess, right on your desk, give me a thumbs up if you're at completely, a thumbs middle if you're at somewhat, or a thumbs down if you're at do not understand. Thumbs up, middle, and down. Nice, excellent. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you very much. Skipping to the essential vocabulary, this is a key component of really all of our lessons now, but specifically in SIOP lessons. Did any of you add to this? I put little spaces under the reminds me of. Did anybody have anything they would like to add to that? Typically in a SIOP lesson, we would dive into this a little bit. For example, scaffolding. What could that remind us of?
I think of like scaffolding like for a house, like you have the steps.
Scaffolding for a house, right. And then as the house is built, what can we do with this?
We can start removing those scaffolds, like once, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then what happens if you're like, it looks fine, let's remove all of them?
Sometimes if it's not the right time, like stuff can start falling apart.
Stuff can fall apart, yeah, real fast. Excellent, thank you very much. So please keep this essential vocab in mind. This can be a guide for some of you, probably a refresher for a lot of you. All right, so we are going to jump to our scaffolded graphic organizer. So what is SIOP? As it was explained to us, it is the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It was developed in a study that started in the late 90s, and the three names that are most associated with this study are Jana Echevarria, Marilyn Vogt, and Deborah Short. Two of them are Professor Emeritus, actually, at the California State University of Long Beach, and then Deborah Short is a director of the Academic Language Resources and Training Center. So once we share this, we talk about the study. Everyone understands, oh, SIOP, sheltered instruction. Then we get to the numbers, and usually the numbers are what makes everyone go, ooh, I don't know if this is for me. So there are 8 components of SIOP and 31 features within those components. Now, I don't want anyone to see this and think, okay, these are 8 additional things I have to do, or 31 additional things I have to do. Hopefully, by the end of this, you'll see, oh, I already do all of this. Now let's mindfully put it in an order that works for me and my students. So of these components are lesson preparation, something we do all the time, building background, comprehensible input, strategies, interaction, practice and application, lesson delivery, and finally review and assessment. Some people do add on extension, but I think if you're continuing lesson preparation in a way that feeds off of what you've done, the extension feeds into lesson preparation very well, so I left it off of here. So we're gonna do a quick overview of each. When I was attending conferences like this early in my career, I'm still kind of early in my career, I found I felt much more of a benefit when people talked about practical things I could use immediately under each component rather than diving headfirst into what the component is, how it was formed, et cetera. I, of course, find that fascinating, but I want to make the most of your time today. So lesson preparation. We, as I said, do this every day, and some of the biggest components of our lesson preparation are objectives. So if you look at the right-hand side of your folder, there's 3 pieces of blue paper. One is a template that says writing, content, and language objectives, and then one has sample language objectives as well as good verbs for content and language objectives as well. So I use templates and prompts a lot like this when I'm forming my own content and language objectives as well. And then I also, when I'm working with a teacher who approaches me and said, I want to help my students more, I want to co-teach, can you come to some of my classes, can we teach some class together, can you take a lesson? I always start here so that we can know where we're going, but it's delivered in a format that's accessible, right? Nobody's scared of 3-4 boxes. And the content and language objectives have to go together. So a lot of times when I was first trying to write these, I didn't have a template like this necessarily. They would say, you just have to focus on the language. So at first, you're like, students will explain by speaking. Okay, so that's not really a deep language objective, but you do want them to talk. So how are they going to speak? Are they going to argue? Are they going to perform a skit? Are they going to rehearse some kind of prompt and see if they can ask the right person the right questions to negotiate meaning? Are they going to have a conversation with a peer and you're going to be lurking by them listening? We're all really good at that now. Are you going to have them talk to you one-on-one? Are they going to be presenting something to the class? So the language objectives are made much easier if you look at the middle step right here, which is the language demands. How will the language be used in this lesson? So how many of you teach or taught English, math, science, or social studies? Excellent. And of those of you who have them up, do you have any pretty simple content objectives in your mind from those? I mean, one I think of, I taught social studies for ESL students last year, so I think of the precedents set by George Washington's farewell address. All different content or content standards that are released, we have to put them into student-friendly content objectives. So even if you can't think of one right now, that's where that one would go. And then the language demands. Well, with one group of 8th graders that I was teaching this to, I knew I really needed to work on their writing. So I knew the language domain was going to be writing. But are they going to write to explain? Are they informing? Are they arguing? Are they simply recounting something? And then how are they going to do that? So if you look at the back of your sample language objective sheet, there's just a few verbs that work really well with the content verbs, and there's tons of lists like this online. I would always go to the Center for Applied Linguistics website. They have tons of free resources. I actually got a lot of this material from a training I attended last November. They're amazing, and they have so many resources to share. But under the Add Your Own, I would add your own through Bloom's taxonomy, right? So you're going to be working through lots of different lessons. You really want to make sure that these sheets are something you can grab. Say we're at this level. Okay, I want them to go here. What do I need to pull? And you also don't have to be limited to this as well. You can come up with all different types of things. We were talking this morning about how sometimes in a content lesson, you do want them to work on an aspect of social language. So some of these verbs might be a little too formal for what you're doing, and that's totally fine. So content and language objectives, when you see lesson preparation, in addition to all of the things you're going to get ready for your lesson, the objectives are incredibly important. So then we go into building background. So this is the phase where we help students make connections with what we're going to be teaching them. This is especially important for our English learners because a lot of times when they're in our classrooms, they can feel like I don't have any connections with this, or be seen as this child doesn't have a lot of connection with this, so I'm gonna explain it in a different way. But children bring all kinds of expertise to our classrooms, as we know. So if you can find a way to connect prior experiences and prior learning with something about your lesson, it can be incredibly complex or incredibly simple. It's going to not only get them in the mind frame of what you're going to be teaching, but it's going to show them, okay, I do bring something to this. I'm not completely disconnected from this. I have my own connection with this. You can do that in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to be a whole mini lesson at the beginning. It can be a simple 3-4 minute conversation. Has anyone heard of this? Has anyone seen a president or a leader give a speech before? Talk to me about that. And let's not forget, I mean, the students who are silently listening are benefiting it from it too. We can't say that they're not making a connection because they're not participating. Obviously, we want them to participate verbally eventually, but there are a lot of ways that even doing this as a class, even if only a few of your students speak, it's benefiting the whole group. So when we look at building background and the activities that do build background, how many of you recognize one that you have done in the last year? Vocab games, a word wall, a read aloud, anticipation guide. I see a lot of nods around the room. So this is what I mean by hoping that you see that you're already doing this. But starting out a lesson or a unit with something like this, as we know, is incredibly beneficial for the students. Building background and comprehensible input is where we also start introducing and start to reinforce the vocabulary aspect. We'll get into this a little bit later, but we want to have a nice balance between academic vocabulary and functional vocabulary. In my George Washington lesson, we want to know what farewell means. We want to know what an address means, thinking a speech versus a place of living. But we also need to know the prefix pre and all of the different ways it can be combined with a word to have different meanings, like precedent. Also, I noticed that precedent and president are minimal pairs. So for a lot of my students, I was gonna have to work with them and not saying the President George Washington farewell address. No, the precedents said by George Washington's farewell address. So there's a lot of different things that you can work into vocabulary. And again, that doesn't have to be a whole mini lesson every single time you do this either. I taught 45-minute periods, which just seems like a blink. I know sometimes 45 minutes, like in the car or something, seems forever, but man, those 45 minutes would fly by. And I would always think, I'm really not reviewing vocabulary very much. How can I do this? And I remembered my Spanish teacher in high school would stand at the door with vocabulary cards, and your ticket in the door was one word. So I thought, even if I can just do one different word every day, and because I had smaller classes, I could think, okay, this kid got this one and this one, I'm gonna put this one up and see if they can get this one. So there's a lot of sneaky ways that you can work these things in. And then moving into comprehensible input, that basically means what are the scaffolds you're providing, what are the supports you're providing to make sure that the students can access this information. Realia is a huge thing. Anything, especially I teach middle school. Any other middle school teachers in here? Middle school? Woo. They love to touch stuff, right? They love to have objects and things, so I would try to bring that in as much as I could. The scaffolded graphic organizer, again, I found a lot of my students like that, especially my 8th graders. They're very nervous about taking notes in high school. They told me, they were like, I'm not gonna be able to do that on my own. So after I discovered that that was one of their concerns, we started making these graphic organizers, and then slowly I would remove and add more and more blanks so that they had to be filling it in themselves to practice. And it's teaching them skills that are gonna be taken to other classes as well. Sentence frames and sentence strips, those were all over my walls and they were so helpful. I know none of us look when our students are testing, but I always thought it might be nice if I was walking by a computer or a testing booklet and saw, in addition to, and you're just like, yes, yes, they use that, that little sentence frame. Not that that ever happened and that I would ever do that, but it would be nice. And then different aspects of media. So many of my students have semi-professional YouTube channels for makeup, and some kids have thousands of people that watch them play video games, and they're showing me all these things, and I'm like, first of all, who has the time to watch someone else play a video game away from the camera? But then I was thinking, wait, these kids are really tech savvy. Let's bring some of this in. So different types of media, if I could incorporate different television shows or games that they're interested in, music, I mean, nothing new, right? These are all things that we've had to do forever. But doing it kind of at the start, and that also tying into the lesson preparation component, thinking, okay, where is this going to go? How am I going to get them there? Media was a really big help. So looking up at this, you probably have something that you do in each category, probably in that order. And if you want, there's a little table on your first page of your packet. If there's extra examples that you want to add, or things up there that you think, oh, that would be kind of fun, maybe I'll try that, please feel free to do so. And I can go back to this at the end. All right, so continuing on, we have strategies, interaction, and practice and application. So for strategies, basically we want to promote metacognition, right? The mother of all learning styles. We want them to start thinking about how they're thinking and use their own questions to get what they need out of the lesson. The ultimate goal for us, obviously, is to be the guide on the side, the master questioner that's going to elicit information from students and give them supports so that they find it themselves rather than us handing it to them. I say that's the goal because when you have only so many months to prepare for WIDA and state testing and all of the other testing that happens, sometimes you really just want to hand it to them. But when you do, it's not as beneficial. They're not going to remember it. They're not going to make meaning with it. So if you can find strategies that work for your students, it doesn't feel like you're taking too much time and you just really want to give it to them. You know they're going to get there. So again, graphic organizers, I try to put through line ones that can be helpful. Question answer responses, questioning beforehand is really good. I would have students brainstorm lists of questions about things that can be easily done on a quick KWL chart, or you can do a whole lesson out of it if you have the time. Digital storytelling as well. There's a lot of digital storytelling about specific topics that we're teaching. History, I mean, my goodness, there's so much digital storytelling about that, which is really cool. But you can have students, sometimes as a project at the end of the year, pick a topic from what they learned that year, do some digital storytelling about it, and then have the next year's students watch it as something to learn about. There's a bunch of different ways that you can promote strategies that they're gonna use not only in your class, but in other classes. And then interaction, right? We really want our students interacting meaningfully, both in terms of their language development, but also in terms of their social development. I had so many students earnestly say to me, I get really uncomfortable with anything but texting. I get really uncomfortable talking to people. I feel like I don't know what to say. So getting them comfortable with that, and also providing things that are in their comfort zone instead of just always pushing them out of it can be helpful. Anytime I had students text an answer to the board, or if we did, for example, a Nearpod activity where they could enter something onto a discussion forum, they would say, can I use my phone? I would almost always say yes, because I did want them to feel comfortable and realize you already know how to do this. You just have to get used to talking to each other. And sometimes interaction with some classes, you can just let them partner up and it's great, and sometimes that is just not going to be a good idea. So for the classes where you need a little more structure, you can have clock buddies for students who need to work on writing or maybe are uncomfortable speaking and you need to take a few steps back. Dialogue journals are great. Those can be on paper or online. A classroom blog, different ways students can talk with you and each other. When I started using Teams in my classroom, they were so excited until I got the flu. And when they logged on, I was already there saying, hey, if you need anything, let me know. And they were all like, oh, my sub told me, they were like, she's here. but she's not here. But after they got over the initial big brother shock of that, they were like, oh, when you do this, should I start it with this or this? Like, they started taking advantage of having that access. And I would see, and I think to this day they think I couldn't see all of it, but I could see when they would talk to each other and help each other. And it was really cool to see that, to see all of these students who didn't really want to talk to me or each other at the beginning of the year, talking across my classroom and talking digitally. It was really interesting. Flipgrid is also really cool. I have had a lot of 6th grade hams this year. They were very vivacious, loved the camera, so Flipgrid was pretty fun for them. As well as dinner party when they have to discuss something and everyone in the party, I guess, has a different role. So all of those promote interaction. And then we go to practice and application. But I put these 3 together because a lot of times one activity can put all of these together. So if you look at a class blog and they're practicing a grammar structure and they're also practicing arguing 2 sides of debate, but they're using strategies that you taught them, that's going to combine all of these, saving you time, but providing them with the experience that's going to help them make meaning with the subject area. Practice and applications. I mean, we use foldables. We use simulations. Has anyone seen Kim Campbell speak in Rutherford County? Kim Campbell at all? She talks about this simulation that teaches about different tiers of countries in the world, and you have to collect all of these things called baldicers, which are your resources, and some countries help each other, some countries wall everybody off and try to hoard their resources, and you have to get a certain amount of points to win. And it's really fascinating, but it's a simulation that can be changed and warped into whatever you need it to do, and they love that. They love putting on a new role in school. Manipulatives, also getting into tech, Quizlet, Quizzes, Quizlet Live, Kahoot. My kids loved that. And that's another really quick assessment tool. It's so amazing. You can just click one button and download all of the data afterwards and look at it, and you can say, okay, they're having trouble with this. As long as you know who's who, they use some crazy nicknames on there sometimes, but if you can decipher that, you're gonna get a lot of great data. And to them, they're playing a game. They're getting to be competitive. They're not getting this piece of paper in front of them or a computer in front of them and reminded of all the tests they're gonna have to take when their friends in the other classes only have to take half as many, right? It's fun for them. So I think the goal of SIOP, and this wasn't really explained to me explicitly, I kind of had to figure it out on my own, is to combine some of these to maximize your instruction and maximize your time. All right, and then the final part, lesson delivery, that's happening all throughout the SIOP program. So different things you're doing to help your students. These are activities that fall under the lesson delivery category. So think pair share. We had student podcasts this year, gallery walk. Gotta love gallery walk. My goodness, it's so much fun. It gets everybody out of the middle of your classroom so you can go and straighten all the desks, and then when they sit back down, everything's nice. And then newspaper headlines. A lot of my students like to do tweets or little Instagram posts about different things. And that can be incorporated anywhere into the strategies, interaction, and practice and application portion. Review and assessment, even though it's the final component of the SIOP model, it should by no means be saved for the end, because these are components, not steps. You don't necessarily have to follow them in a specific order. They're not boxes you have to check off. You can adapt this as you see fit. So different handheld devices are really popular in our school. A lot of them have their own handheld device that can be put to use. And if you, I found, become the teacher that allows them to use phones in a productive way, I had way less students abuse that than some of my colleagues who just had a firm no phone, don't use this, don't touch it, don't talk about it, don't even look at it policy. And so, and sometimes I would have students come up to me and say, you know, I'm really sorry I was distracted by my phone, let me leave it on your desk for the day. Of course, trying to get me to say, oh, how lovely, but I would say, okay, let's do it. Quizlet, Quizzes, Kahoot, different journals. Vocabulary journals can be something that you start in the building background phase and carry all the way through. They can keep it with them, they can present them. Anticipation guides. So the anticipation guide, column B, if you look at it, can come back at the end. You can either collect this and see if they have made, what progress they've made, what they're still struggling with, or you can let them keep it. You can have them see, okay, you're gonna assess yourself today, and then we're gonna do some more practice tomorrow, and then I'm gonna see how you're doing. I found that model was most beneficial, letting them keep it and then trying it. And then once you've made it through your first SIOP lesson, you have to have a happy dance. So I have some recommendations there. Cupid shuffle, cha-cha slide. I'm old school. I like the electric slide. Just don't forget to stretch with that. So any questions so far about any of the components of the SIOP model? Now, some of you might be wondering, where are those 31 features? You can look all of them up, but they're not anything fancy or out of the ordinary. For example, comprehensible input has 3 features. It's appropriate speech, clear explanation of academic tasks, and a variety of techniques used. So it's just different things that fall under best practices of teaching. They just organize them throughout the model. All right, so now that we've done our overview and shared some different tools that we can use to achieve this, I thought I'd talk a little bit about why SIOP can be beneficial. So first, we're gonna look at some research regarding academic language and second language acquisition. That's one of your key vocab things. We're gonna talk about the SIOP model in practice. I have some research examples that have been included. And then we're gonna talk about a little bit about what I experienced using the SIOP model in my classroom this year. So BICS versus CALP, a lot of you have heard about this, but BICS is basic interpersonal communication skills. Some sources say basic interpersonal communicative skills, so if you've seen that before, it's basically the same thing. And as its first term states, it is basic language. So it's more social language. A lot of people call it locker language or hallway language, and that develops rather quickly for most students. 1 to 2 years, BICS can develop beautifully, and that's when, as the ESL teacher, you have different core subject teachers coming to you and saying, they have such a great conversation with me, and then they're failing these tests. I'm like, well, the test isn't a conversation with them. And intermediate advanced BICS like this can fool a lot of teachers. And it can fool us too sometimes. I mean, I've been having discussions with students or have them read aloud, and then when we switch to a listening activity, you're like, whoa, there's a huge deficit here that I overlooked because they're so able to talk to me and chat with me. So don't be too hard on yourself, but it's something to keep in mind. Then CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency, that's all the academic, technical, specific language. And that is the language that's going to move them up in terms of the WIDA rubric, specifically the WIDA writing rubric, as we've talked about this morning a little bit. I did a lot of work with my students looking at the WIDA writing rubric this year and the differences between a 2 and a 3, a 3 and a 4, a 4 and a 5. And so we would talk about basic language, school supplies, and then, okay, a little bit more specific is a binder, and then a little more specific is a lavender binder, and then a lavender binder from Staples. So all of those activities that we do in elementary school to grow a sentence, those can't go away in middle school and high school with our students, because think of how much practice all of the native English speakers have had with these types of techniques. CALP takes between 7 and 9 years to develop. It's something that is often forgotten when we're getting ready for testing, when we're looking at where students need to be, according to different mandates by the state or your school or even your expectations of yourself. It takes 7 to 9 years of consistent practice. It's not just like, oh, they've been here 7 years, why isn't this ready? Well, for the first 2 years, maybe they weren't in school, or they only got English at school, and then at home and in the summers and on breaks didn't speak English at all because they didn't have anybody to talk to who spoke English. And this can also be something that can be very comforting to your colleagues. I had a lot of teachers come to me and say, I feel like I'm not doing enough for these kids. They're so quiet. They're struggling, and I can see that they're frustrated. And I would have to say, it's okay. This aspect is going to take a long time. but their BICS is doing great. So to make them calm before class, talk to them about something that they like. Maybe throw in their name to a math problem on the board, or any little effort is going to help these kids. And the fact that you're all here and that we work with lots of teachers who are attending summer PDs like this is helping our kids. But it is important to keep in mind, especially when you're under the gun and WIDA's around the corner and you're like, 7 to 9 years needs to speed up really quick. All right, so taking that and how you can also frame this for teachers, I'm continuing on with some research by a researcher named Jim Cummins. Anyone heard of Cummins? Awesome, love it. He developed BICS and CALP and the dual iceberg theory. It's also called the interdependence hypothesis. So it's the idea that students come to you who are English learners that already have mastered their BICS of their L1, and they're going to start working on their BICS of their L2 first. But there might be a degree of CALP in their L1 that you have no idea about and may never know, right? They could have incredibly advanced CALP in their home language. Or they could not be literate in their home language at all and struggle even with BICS and especially their CALP. So the idea is that both of them, under the water, the CALPs that you can't see, the bottom of the iceberg, creates a common underlying proficiency. They can actually help each other, and if one is left to just be ignored, they can actually pull each other down. So we really need to be mindful of the fact that we're emphasizing their CALP and BICS of English, but we don't want them to lose or plateau their CALPs and BIC of their home language or primary language or really any of the other languages that they have. Now, teachers have a million things to do, so I'm not suggesting that you go out and learn all of the languages of your students so that they can keep up their CALP. But providing different resources in different languages in your classroom, looking up resources that they can take home, encouraging them to talk with their parents about the academic language that they're learning in their class and translating it into their own language at home. All of this can help really strengthen the common underlying proficiency. In Cummins' model of bilingual pedagogy, he also has a rather famous quote, and it's long, so I'm going to read it off of here. He says, language and content will be acquired most successfully when students are challenged cognitively, but provided with the contextual and linguistic supports or scaffolds required for successful task completion. So, how do we do this? Why the SIOP model, of course. It provides all of the scaffolds. It lets you access grade level content at any level of English proficiency. And it is something that is always changeable. You don't necessarily have to look at this. For example, I was talking with a teacher and they said, okay, but for all of these different levels, I'm gonna have to do 8 different lesson plans. And I said, well, if you want to, you could. Or you could do it all on one and say, okay, these kids, they're gonna take this a step further. If you know where the lesson's going, you shouldn't have to make 50 lesson plans for your students. It's all about outlook. So we understand our BICS, we understand our CALP, we're throwing our SIOP in there, we're rocking it, and we still can't reach some of these students. I took a great class that I feel like I didn't fully appreciate when I was taking it from 6 to 9:30 at night in grad school working 2 jobs, but I appreciate it now, all about second language acquisition theory and research. And so the Center for Applied Linguistics has compiled a series of things that can affect this and that are going to affect it no matter what efforts you are making. And you need to keep those in mind, not only so that you set realistic expectations for yourself in your classroom, but that you can also think creatively about how to circumvent those things. The first one being age. If you have older students, there's pluses and minuses to that. Sometimes an older student who has mastered the BICS and the CALP of their first language can acquire the BICS and the CALP of the second language rather quickly. Again, sometimes if an older student is trying to learn English and has never heard it before the age that they missed that critical period of language learning. Has anyone heard of the critical period hypothesis? Excellent. It's the idea that it's basically a few years before a child hits puberty. That's like the prime language learning years. They've been hearing it since they were born, but that's when they're going to acquire the bulk of their language. Again, if your students are too young and you're focusing on the BICS and the CALP of English and they lose their L1, not only can that make it more difficult for them in school, but they are literally losing a connection with their family and their past. And we would never want to do that, especially since a lot of my students this year, I don't want to speak for your students, but loss was a common theme in our discussions. A lot of them had to give up a lot to be here. And a lot of them know that their families gave up a lot, even though they didn't have to give up a lot. So we want to work around them losing something else if we can help it. Presence of a disability. English learners have historically been both over-identified and underclassified in terms of disability classifications. And also, I noticed this especially this year, once a student with a disability gets into an ESL program, it is so hard for them to get out. I had a student who, she was advanced. She was advanced in speaking English. Her writing in my class was great. When it came time for the tests, she struggles a lot with test taking. And that score, I don't even know what her score is, and I know it did not represent what she can do. And I know she didn't test out. So that can be frustrating. And working with other specialists in your building, special education teachers, their parents, classroom teachers, that can give that child the best chance to actually demonstrate what they know so you can help them the best. Motivation and personality. Lots of personality in middle school. I'm sure it's the same everywhere else, but figuring out your student's personality and what motivates them can be incredibly helpful, and that's something we do in any class, in any situation. Their level and type of L1 proficiency. If they are not literate in their first language, that can present some challenges. If they are literate to a degree, but have maybe learned mistakes, that can be difficult to relate between the two languages. Also, language distance and access to the language. If they can't speak English at home or don't have access to any English resources at home, they're missing out on a lot of practice. Language distance, it would be way easier for me to learn French than it would be for me to learn Mandarin. So we have to think the same thing about our students. Also, you know when you're teaching and you say a word and then a student starts laughing and they're like, oh, that means something different where I come from, and you're like, well, we're here, we're at this crossroads, how do we proceed? Also, content knowledge. Students might know a lot about the content, but if they don't understand the question that's being asked, or if they've never seen the picture that it's related to, it might not actually measure what they know about it. And then quality of instruction, you don't have to worry about that because you're spending your summers here and getting different professional development training. But if the instruction quality is lacking, or for example, one year I had a teacher whose wife tragically passed away, and we had a series of substitutes. And nobody could really change the situation, but none of us did very well at the end of the year on the exams, and that can sometimes come into play as well. Okay, so we'll just go through this rather quickly. The first set of findings were developed when the study forming SIOP and testing it out was started. It was the effects of sheltered instruction on the achievement of LEP students, and it involved teacher and researcher collaboration. Collaboration is such an important word when it comes to SIOP. SIOP is not something that should be attempted alone. You know, when they say, like, do not attempt this professional, it should say that, but do not attempt this alone. It takes a team. And the teachers who had been implementing this over several years did end up experiencing greater overall gains in their students than comparison groups that had similar populations but didn't implement it. If we jump forward to 2002, this is in an elementary school in Arizona. It was a 2-year teacher training program where they slowly rolled out, I think it was month by month, the different components at first, and then they had teachers fully implementing SIOP models and gave them feedback. 86% of third grade students who began in the kindergarten program were performing at or above grade level by the time they were in third grade. And now this includes all of the students, not just the English learners. And then students in all grade levels outperform similar students in similar district schools. So now we're getting into evidence that it is beneficial for all of the students. As we saw when we looked through the execution portion, it really is just best practice. It's just mindful. And then in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools of North Carolina, this is currently going on. It started with 15 schools, and now it's all of the schools in this district. And then we have 3 different impacts, which I love that they spelled it out this way. But 6 of the 7 SIOP schools met the LEP-AYP reading target, and 5 of 7 met the math target, which is pretty outstanding. For middle schools, the trend data showed greater reading gains in the SIOP classrooms than non-SIOP. I know reading is a huge issue in Rutherford County, as it is in many other counties as well. And then in high schools, they had higher scores in SIOP classrooms for Algebra 1, Geometry, and English 1. And I feel like so often in high schools, sometimes the English learners might be a little bit forgotten, or teachers might be kind of at their wits' end because they're like, there's all this elementary resource and there's all this middle school resource. How can we incorporate these things into high school? And the SIOP model works perfectly with that. So my experience with SIOP, I'm here with Thomas Jefferson at Monticello. I'm actually going there next week. I'm really excited. I describe it lovingly as a match made in reality. I love the SIOP model, but it is not a catch-all. It is not a dream all the time. It's not going to solve every classroom problem that ever happened. And little bright, shiny new teacher me last year was like, I'm going to SIOP and I'm going to win SIOP. And I got a healthy dose of reality at some points. So overall, I am so glad that I knew what the SIOP model was because I got excellent gains from my students. The previous year, I was informed that SIOP wasn't used in terms of teaching social studies. And so I really wanted to mindfully use SIOP all year, but also give myself some freedom to test it out. Does this work better when I break it up? Should I keep it all together? Should I do lessons? Should I do units? So I just explored a lot of different things. So these were what the projections of my 6th, 7th, and 8th graders were supposed to get on their final state tests. So if the projection was for 6th grade, basically equated to a 33% out of 100. You can see that with their winter benchmark, which is in December, we give benchmarks as tests that are like a full year imitation of what they'll see on the state exam. We start it in December, and then we also do the same exact one, we just change it around a little bit, in March. So in December, my 6th and 7th graders already beat their projection. And I feel like I owe a lot of that to the SIOP model. Also, we're talking about they got that score in April? It's already December. They've definitely made gains since then. The fuchsia was the spring benchmark, so they went even higher than their projection. And then in terms of 8th grade, they made steady progress towards their projection, which is the ultimate goal of the benchmarks. You don't necessarily have to get 100% on them in terms of your growth score, but you want to consciously be making progress. So for my evidence, obviously I want to look at this over several years and expand it to other subject areas, but the class I taught by myself, the evidence so far is pretty positive for the SIOP model. Successes, again, I talk about my benchmark data, having some kind of summative assessment, even though they were a little overwhelmed sometimes with the magnitude of these tests. It was helpful to not only see for me, but to show them, you guys already beat this. Like, think of if you doubled this growth score, how amazing that would be for you. And that was such a huge motivator for them. We also, in terms of our WIDA scores, we actually doubled the amount of students who tested out this year as compared to last year, which was really exciting. It's still personally a number that's a little small. We always want to keep improving, but it was really exciting to see, like, okay, our efforts are making a difference. It's the beginning, but we're going somewhere with this. Obstacles. One of my obstacles was time. Obviously, 45 minutes, 84 social studies standards per grade level, switching different grade levels, 3 preps, and then I was pushing into science and math classes as well. Sometimes I would have days where I would just come home and sit and kind of stare out into space against my wall because it would be a little overwhelming. Collaboration, I would sometimes be all set to co-teach a lesson, and then I would get there and they'd be like, oh, sorry, we totally switched this thing, we have to do this. And it's not necessarily their fault, but if they had told me ahead of time, I probably could have adjusted as well. Also, I'm not sure if this happened in your schools, but we had a huge influx of students at spring break. Like, every day there seemed like there was a new kid. A lot of you are like, oh my gosh. And so when you're in spring and you're in testing season, there's all these new students. It was pretty insane. And if you're halfway through this beautiful SIOP lesson that you worked on really hard and a new kid comes in and you're like, oh, they didn't get their building background or comprehensible input, should we start over? It can be kind of tricky. And I think it's important for us to keep those obstacles in mind, right? We can't just pretend I'm using the SIOP model and everything's great and everything's perfect. You have to look at those obstacles to see how can you improve for the future. So this is what I did. These are just a general list for you to consider from what I have gained from the good and bad of using SIOP in the classroom. One person is not enough. I realized that when I started teaching other people about the SIOP model and that they would say like, hey, I did building background today, or hey, do you want to do a comprehensible input mini lesson? A lot of times my students would see it in their class and then see it in my class and they'd be like, oh, Miss So-and-so did this, or Mr. So-and-so, oh, I saw you guys in that classroom. And it was really cool to see that the students were getting a bigger meaning when it became their bigger picture. When it was just me doing things, there weren't nearly as many gains. So that doesn't mean I'm gonna stop, but it does mean that it is encouraging to see all of you here, and then I'm gonna keep encouraging people to learn about it. I found much more success with SIOP unit plans. I still do SIOP lessons, but a lot of times for me to use all of those components and give students the time that they really needed to make meaning, I would pick 3 standards maybe and put them all into a little mini unit or a little group as part of a subunit. Confidence in the adaptability of the SIOP model is crucial. You have to know that you can change it at any point in the game. If you are getting into strategies and before moving on to practice and application and interaction, you realize, oh my gosh, they have no meaning with these strategies, they have no grasp of these, make it a strategies lesson. You can still teach all the same stuff, but you can focus on the strategies. You have to be confident in being able to change it rather than rigidly following these 8 steps, because they're not steps. Be mindful of vocabulary now or regret it later. That's why I started putting it on my anticipation guides and my introductory materials, because sometimes I would be like, oh, I want to get to this, so I'm going to skip this, we'll get to it later. Does not work. Tried. The people nodding in here, I'm sure have tried. Just doesn't work. As I said, they're components, not steps. You don't have to go in an exact order necessarily, and don't save review and assessment for the end. We can always be assessing, and that can inform what we change. All right, so looking back to our folders, we have just enough time to do this. There should be a little yellow sticky note with a sticker on it. Does everyone have one of those? Okay, so I put in my wording what you would probably use for your class. So when it says the numbered shape card in your folder, for you guys, I figured we could just handle sticky notes with a little sticker. What you're going to do, and it's literally just gonna take 2 minutes probably, is you're gonna share one idea for incorporating SIOP into your classroom and discuss one challenge you perceive you'd face in doing so and how you plan to overcome it with someone who has the same sticker as you. You can take any of your materials with you that you want. I've put all of the different strategies up there in case you need to reference them. But really quickly, please find somebody with the same sticker near you, or you can get up, stretch a little bit, and discuss. I'll give you 2 minutes. All right, let's bring our discussions to a close and find our way back to our seats. Thank you so much for your thoughtful participation. Would anybody like to share one challenge that they feel like they might come up against in their classroom and how they plan to overcome it. Yes, ma'am.
We over here it's not that we have difficulty, it's like how are we actually planning, if we're the EL teacher going into the gen ed classroom and we don't have plan book, how are we actually planning the lesson with the content? We can't share plan book, but that's an obstacle, like who's going to be in charge of the content? Should just the gen ed be content? We be language? Are we going to merge together? How are we actually planning and applying all the strategies into our lesson?
Excellent. So her question, for those of you who couldn't hear, was how are we actually going to be planning and incorporating all of the strategies that we've talked about into the lessons? Does it involve gen ed teachers taking only the content? Are we only language? Do we combine? What does that look like? So what do you think is one thing that you would do to start bridging that gap?
We have started the co-teaching model a little bit more and actually diving into that about when we're actually co-planning and reflecting with each other. But the time is the big obstacle within our day. And then we're the EL teachers and we have the gen ed teachers who are doing their team meetings. So our big first step that we're trying to get is actually sitting down to talk and finding that time.
And have that time.
Finding the time to talk to each other, yes. You know that the answer can be found eventually if you had the time to discuss with each other. So I just want to highlight 2 more resources in your folder for you before we go. One of them is a SIOP checklist, and it's little things that you can ask yourself at any stage of teaching, any time, a year, as many times as you want, about how much SIOP you're incorporating into your classroom. And that can help you see, okay, look at all this stuff I'm doing. That's great. Now what can I improve? And then I've also included a SIOP template as well. This is a template I used in grad school to help me organize everything. If it doesn't work for you, that's totally fine, which brings me to my next thing. I created a Microsoft Teams page where I've uploaded all of these materials and more, both in terms of PDF and Microsoft Word. If you don't have access to Microsoft Teams, you can take my email or my phone number and text me. I can certainly email anything you need to you. Are there any questions? I know we kind of had to rush at the end. Some really great discussions. Well, feel free to take your folders. You can I have examples of different lesson plans up here that are SIOP for different subject areas. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.